Now the question may naturally be asked, why is Bible scholarship necessary? On the moral level of Christianity, it is not necessary. But as the student increases his own knowledge, he becomes naturally desirous of understanding things which he has previously accepted or perhaps rejected. Secondly, a critical study of the Bible immediately introduces us to the larger field of comparative religion. This is important because it helps to liberate the mind from certain limitations which cannot be known or appreciated or understood until we begin to consider the possibility of a universal spiritual revelation. The critical Bible student must have an understanding of the sacred writings of other nations and peoples, especially those of the Near East, Babylon, Chaldea, and Persia, and of North Africa, the sacred writings of the Egyptians and the Greco-Egyptian restoration. Thus, by degrees, the study of the Bible broadens the religious perspective, makes it possible to take a more inclusive attitude toward scriptural writing. The advantage of this is immediate, in that it liberates the mind from restrictions and prejudice, thus freeing it for clear and direct thinking about important matters. So this evening we want to approach, as we have approached the other sections of this work, those books of the New Testament, from the Acts of the Apostles to the Revelation of St. John. These group together, and because of the limitation of time, we cannot separate them. We must try to consider their composite message, perhaps devoting a little special attention to the Romans and to the book of Revelation. The moment we pass from the evangelists, from the four books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, to the Epistles, the Acts, the minor pastoral books, and the Apostles, we move from the foundation of the words of Jesus to those foundations which belong in the early period of the apostolic era. And from the Acts on, with the exception of Revelation, we are strongly under the influence of the work of St. Paul. There are exceptions also in the minor pastoral work, such as Jude and John. But in substance, these epistles relate to the life and ministry of Saul's prophet. And we must pause, therefore, to examine in a little detail at least the place of St. Paul in the descent of the New Testament tradition. If we are critical, we realize that the epistles of Paul were written between the years 58 and 65 A.D. The exact dating is probably impossible. But due to the references which relate to historical matters, we have this degree of orientation. Now we also approach a number of problems in connection with Paul. One of the most important of which is the psychological estimation of this apostle to the Gentiles. Saul of Tarsus was perhaps the best educated very circle of Christian leaders. Paul's position was that of a man undoubtedly conversant with pre-Christian religious rites and ceremonies. His entire psychology is dominated by one important circumstance, namely that of all the disciples and early apostles, he alone was a citizen of Rome. Now this is a far more vital point than might first be imagined. To understand it, we must proceed, as in most cases of biblical criticism, away from sacred writings to a study of Roman law. And this opens an entirely new field. The city of Tarsus opened its gates to Rome without resistance. And as a result of that, the citizens of Tarsus were made honorary citizens of the Roman Empire. Among those so treated was Saul's father. And naturally, Saul was therefore born a Roman citizen. Now there has been a great deal of interpretation and study about the change of Saul's name from Saul to Paul. Some have assumed that this was a result of his conversion. Others have taken the attitude that it was a highly symbolical gesture on his own part, in which he proclaimed himself the least among the servants of God. Actually, our answer is probably much simpler, far less dramatic, and in the terms of Roman law, most reasonable. As a Roman citizen, Saul of Tarsus would have had a Roman name. He would have had a Jewish name among his own people, but he would have had a Roman name as a Roman citizen. And it is almost certain that the name of Paul is the result of the fact that he was a citizen of the Roman Empire. Paul's life was a strange contradiction. He was well educated. There was a very important center of training, knowledge, and culture at Tarsus. He later studied in the rabbinical school in Jerusalem. He spoke Greek, we know, and his writings have been compared favorably with the orations of Cicero. Thus, we have a man of extraordinary health. We also have a man of remarkable personality. Apparently, a man of intense emotional pressures. A man who probably today would be regarded as neurotic. A man in whose life nothing could be done moderately. A man of intensities and extremes. So we find him first persecuting the Christians. We believe that there is ground for the opinion that he physically attacked and brutally St. John. He did it, however, without question, on motives of the greatest sincerity. In the confused period of history in which these events took place, there was a great deal of conflict between various groups and levels. Saul or Paul firmly believed that the Christian community was a menace to the Jewish state and the Jewish faith. And he appointed himself as a defender of the old order, and therefore was perfectly willing to see the Christian community discomfited and destroyed. He was on his way to Damascus for the purpose of destroying a Christian communion, when the mysterious episode which is known in theology as the Theophany occurred. It was here that the vision, or the illumination, or the appearance of the divine came to him, struck him temporarily blind, and cast him helpless and and hopeless from the earth. It was at that time that he heard the words, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? As far as we can learn, Paul never knew, met, or even saw Jesus during his lifetime. His only contact with him was through the theophany. And we are not convinced from the records that are available whether Paul says that he saw Jesus in the Spirit or merely heard him and felt his presence. But in any event, this tremendous emotional crisis completely changed the manner, the life, the purpose, the conviction of this remarkable person. From that time on, he became the devout and almost fanatical follower of the voice that he had heard in the vision. This has an important bearing upon our subject because Paul now emerges as a person following a doctrine, not as the apostles who had known and lived with Jesus as a man, but following the doctrine of a voice that had come in a vision, surrounded by light, which had shattered his inner frame and reduced him in an instant to complete humility. Thus Paul's concept of Jesus and the Christian ministry was vastly different from that of the apostles. The disciples had lived and had many years labored with Jesus. Their own opinions of him were somewhat diversified, that even the most faithful could not keep vigil with him for a single night. These men, the disciples, were very personal in their attitude. And from what we can gather from the Gospels, regarded Jesus as a rabbin and a teacher, a member of the Jewish community. Paul's attitude was quite different. This attitude brought him into violent conflict with St. Peter and resulted in a great deal of division between himself and members of the original group. But Paul's contribution was unique because of this important difference, that he had not known Jesus in the flesh. It was therefore possible for him to achieve a strange internal impersonality. This impersonality, this detachment, this transformation by the theophany of the concept of Jesus from a man, from a teacher, to a spirit, to a being in space, resulted in what is called the Christology of St. Paul. This Christology undoubtedly contributed a tremendous impulse to the future of the Christian religion. It broke through the barrier of time and changed the perspective from that of a generation in which these incidents occurred and transformed the entire Christian concept from a series of happenings in Judea into a great mystery of the Spirit which could extend through all nations and times and could bind men of 100 centuries together in a belief which was essentially a spiritual mystery of God. That Paul was responsible for the emergence of the doctrine of the Christhood as distinguished from the teachings of the disciples, is now universally acknowledged. Also that Paul, because of this difference within himself, approached the entire problem of Christianity from a different level, even in the beginning. He was not unique in this level, others followed him. And the position taken by Paul was also accepted by nearly all of the classical scholars of the period or the first few centuries of Christendom, who came into the faith from a high level of personal intellectual attainment, such as Dionysius of Alexandria, who became a Christian bishop, but remained a Platonist throughout life. This level was accessible to Paul, who from his writings and from his interpretation was obviously familiar with the writings of the classical Greek school. His very familiarity with these other systems caused him to be regarded with great suspicion by the other disciples, who felt that he was already taking away from them the intimate, personal concept of Jesus. Thus we have two distinct Christianities arising in the first century and marked by certain collisions of doctrine and belief. One of these we will call the Jewish Christian communion, which was strongly represented by St. Peter. And the other was the Hellenistic or Greek Christian communion that was always under the leadership of Paul or the Pauline teachers that followed him. Thus, sometime before the year 60 A.D., there was already a strong division within the body of the Christian community. This division never completely closed, and later at the Council of Nicaea and the Council of Constantinople, this break was widened to result in the gradual emergence of the Eastern and Western churches. The Western Church with its see at Rome, and the Eastern Church, Greek Orthodox, with its see in Byzantium. Thus, the very division of the Roman Empire gradually brought this clear line of demarcation between the two systems of thought. Another point which we must bring up in connection with St. Paul, because it has a bearing upon our subject, was his important journey to Athens as a teacher and apostle to the Athenians. And it is at that point that we find that interesting and remarkable episode of St. Paul at the altar of the unknown God. This again has been subject to a great deal of study. And there has been a question as to exactly how this should be interpreted. There was a plague in Athens, and offerings were made to many deities, and the plague continued. Finally, an offering was made at the altar of an unknown God, and the plague subsided. Students of the Bible have examined the Greek in this situation rather carefully, because it opens an interesting topic. What did the Greeks mean by an unknown God? Was the meaning an unknowable God? In other words, did this altar stand for a supreme being beyond all other gods, and because of its nature ineffable and unknowable, and not to be in any way represented by a statue or anything of that nature? Or did it mean the God of some other people unknown to the Athenians? Did it represent some peculiar point in their own theology? Here your Bible study becomes very important. I've heard this question raised and discussed by a number of interested persons. Unfortunately, however, none of them had recourse to the Greek. For the moment you do, the answer is obvious. An unknowable God, or a supreme being beyond definition, would not have been written in the Greek as in this particular instance. The actual meaning of the word is exactly as we have it in English, that it was some deity, any deity, that might possibly intercede. Simply a God not known, not recognized, or perhaps overlooked in the various religious rites. Therefore, to any other God, the prayers and offerings were made. But it does not mean a superior or different divinity. This episode in connection with Paul has had considerable publicity, recognition. Another reason why, in the story of Paul, we have a man of such extraordinary evangelical fervor may again relate to his citizenship in the Roman Empire. Paul alone, of all this early group, had privileges. He had rights. He could not be condemned without legal trial. He could not be publicly flogged as Jesus had been, because he was a citizen of Rome. And Roman citizenship conferred the right of trial. And you'll remember that while in prison, the centurion came to him to flog him. And Paul reminded the centurion that he was flogging a citizen of Rome, and the centurion stopped immediately because it could have cost him his life. The citizen of Rome could only be brought to penalty by trial and by the full machinery of Roman law. Thus Paul was able to travel. He was able to demand certain attention. He was able to have liberties and rights of free speech and things of that nature, impossible to the others. This probably gave him a certain additional courage, made possible the more rapid expansion of his program. So we have in this general picture something of the nature of Paul. And then we consider what his work and ministry really was. Now, if you divide the epistles from the Gospels, you will find that they are not quite the same. Their spirit is not quite the same. The epistles are infinitely more specific, more practical for certain purposes, more downward, and also are more abundantly large with the privileges of Roman law. The epistles were, for the most part, prepared for the various outlying congregations that were springing up, and which are referred to collectively in the Apocalypse as the 7 churches which are in Asia. These communions arising in distant cities, in distant parts of the far-flung Roman Empire, were small communions. They were not powerful. They had no important churches. The term church in this case was hardly appropriate. Many times these meetings were held in the private homes of the common people. For the most part, these communions were out of touch with each other. And the great cycle of epistles was intended to help to draw these communions together, to keep them more or less in line, and to correct the irregularities which almost immediately appeared within these groups. Paul, as a sort of central distributing point, addressed his various epistles to the different groups, and a good example of these epistles is the Romans. We know from the general structure of this epistle that it was what we would call today a circular letter. In other words, the epistle to the Romans, by the changing of only a few verses, could have been sent to any one of the various churches. It was almost perfectly devised for whoever needed it, and was an unfoldment and exposition of Paul's concept of what was necessary for the maintenance of the communion. You will also him already the term Christ and our Lord Jesus Christ, or Jesus the Christ in the original, have become the conventional statement. Now, the general structure of the Christian society of that time can be deduced from the tone of the Epistles and Pastoral writings. We find every evidence that these communions were so widely scattered that they had the greatest difficulty in maintaining an orthodoxy, or in determining what constituted the proper Christian procedure. Also, most of the converts have been derived from other groups and other beliefs, and their orthodoxies were exceedingly questionable. Almost immediately, a series of compromises set in the early church. These compromises consisted of a constant effort to engraft other beliefs and sects upon the early descent of the Christian theology. This perhaps was not the result of lack of piety or the result of intent, but almost inevitably those coming from various beliefs brought part of these beliefs with them and began to interpret Christianity in the terms of these other beliefs. In other words, they did the same thing that the disciples claimed St. Paul himself had done. They said that he had sold out Christianity to Greek philosophy. He, in his turn, in writing his epistles and letters, warned these various Christian communities that they were selling out their spiritual birthright by being intermixed with the prevailing doctrines of the time. Fortunately, in this level, we have outside testimony, which assures us that the line of differentiation between the Christian and non-Christian world in the first century A.D. was exceedingly thin. In fact, in many areas it was non-existent. We know that the first 16 popes were actually Jews of Orthodox background. We know also that many of the leaders of the church in the first 3 centuries were Greek scholars or Egyptian scholars, that many of them had already been deeply imbued with other teachings and beliefs, even as late as St. Augustine of Hippo, who was a Manichaean and a Gnostic. This meant that the problem of orthodoxy was a delicate one. So delicate that the early ante-Nicene fathers, like Clement of Alexandria, even went so far as to try to arbitrate between the Christian community and the non-Christian world in which they function. He insisted, for example, that the principal differences between Christianity and paganism at that time were differences of terms, and that actually the beliefs were parallel, if not identical. You know that the Bishop Synesius, whom I have already mentioned to you, accepted the appointment of Christian bishops with 2 personal reservations. First, that he should be a bishop, and at the same time keep his wife. He had been long and happily married, and while it was assumed that the bishop of the church would lead a celibate existence, he said, if you want me for a bishop, you will take my wife along with me. The church agreed. The second said, if you want me as a Christian bishop in North Africa, that is all right, with the simple fact that I will fulfill these functions, but I will not give up my beliefs in the pagan gods. The church agreed. Evidently they needed a bishop all for that. This condition was not unusual. We find records in as late as the 2nd and 3rd century that Christian bishops visiting Alexandria first performed Mass at the temple of Serapis and then went and performed Mass in the Christian churches. In other words, there was no line as we know it today. This line was drawn much later. And even in the Pauline Epistles, we have the definite assurance that there are sheep that are not of this fold, that there are other faiths, and the apostle was not in a position to decry them all or to decline them empirically. Even as late as the medieval period, when Christianity was completely established as far as a world religion is concerned, the church maintained a most favorable attitude toward Plato and also took a most generous attitude toward Hermes and the Hermetic writings of the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd century, these early periods. This lack of a clear line of division between Christianity and the non-Christian civilization around it is also reflected strongly in the epistles of Paul. He is calling upon these communions largely to demonstrate their faith and their orthodoxy and their conformity with the Christian concept by the living of exemplary lives, by the keeping of the spiritual covenant, and to a degree at least by breaking away from the old forms of orthodox Jewry. They were not to follow and merely be reformed rabbis. They were to assume a definite and completely clear historical position as a new faith. Paul, working with these problems, works constantly from a very definite background. Now, you realize that many of the words attributed to Jesus, including the last words on the cross, are direct quotations from the Old Testament. We find, however, that in the works of Paul, there occur a number of statements and a number of forms of religious philosophy that do not parallel the Old Testament, and therefore cannot be cross-referenced. One of these is Paul's description of himself, where he says, "I'm a wise master builder." This statement is not to be found in the Old Testament. It is not to be found in hardly any of the apostolic writings of the following 3 centuries. It stands almost unique. And the use of the term implies at that time overseer, or one in charge of workmen. It implied also a knowledge of some of the pagan initiatory rituals of the secret orders of that time, such as the Dionysian Antiquity, and rites and mysteries celebrated at Tarsus and also at Epistles. There is every reason from the words of Paul to assume definitely that he was an initiate of pagan mysteries prior to his conversion. This well may be the key to the Pauline approach, because he was concerned primarily with a universal mystery, and his teaching has gradually gained in favor through the centuries until by the middle of the 19th century, most Christianity has moved onto a Pauline footing. A footing which meant that history was subservient to mystical revelation. That the great secret of religion lay within the individual. And that it was the Christ he knew that was the hope of glory. This doctrine of the Christ he knew does not occur in the Gospel. Yet without it, the far-flung structure of later Christianity would not have come into existence. It was the motion of this concept, the Greek concept of the Logos, that by degrees overshadowed the personal problem and resulted in a series of critical situations arising within Christian theology, which in turn gave rise to the great councils of the Church, which attempted to reconcile the powerful differences between the Gospels and the Epistles. Yet the weight of reality seemed to rest heavily with the Epistles, because the content was bigger. The context was suitable to gradual unfoldment into a great world religion. It had all the necessary ingredients to spread and expand and to meet the spiritual requirements of other people. Here Paul, perhaps, was expedient, but the degree of his expediency we cannot tell at this time. Certainly Paul could not have been successful in Athens had he followed the exact teachings and beliefs that were being distributed by St. Peter. The Athenians, particularly the scholars, the legislators, the men of influence and power, would not have accepted the physical existence of a God. They would not have accepted the Jesus of the Gospels, literally and historically. They would, however, accept the entire story as paralleling their own great philosophic system, and would be perfectly willing to see a compatibility and even an identity between the Christos of Paul and the Logos of Plato. And because they were an educated and schooled group, and because this group had to increase within the body of the church, we know that the Greek Christian group expanded far more rapidly on an intellectual level than the Jewish Christian group. In fact, gradually, the Jewish Christian group was practically a stall into the descent of Greek Christianity. And this, of course, is rather well pointed out by the fact that almost all, in fact, all of these very early codices that we have of the Bible are in Greek, as I have already told you. Now, the substance and essence of this situation is subject to one other important orienting factor, one with which very few nominal Christians are acquainted. And that is the psychology of the world at that time. A psychology which was partly perpetuated by the Jewish tradition and partly by the Christians. If you will study the Bible carefully, you will observe that throughout the New Testament there is a strong tendency to assume that the end of the world was at hand. There was no apparent conviction among these followers that the world itself would endure for more than 100 years. For most part, therefore, there was no consideration for the future. There was no consideration for the upbringing of children. There was no consideration of importance for marriage. There was no plan for the development of a society or an industrial or economic concept of life. From other non-religious sources of that period, we know that the world was then under a very heavy pessimism, and that men of different beliefs and various nationalities were all certain that the world was coming to an end. Thus, the millennium was practically at hand. And the last judgment and the division of the quick and the dead was not something to take place far off in the future, but something that might be daily and hourly expected. As part of this prophecy, the Jewish people felt was fulfilled with the fall of Jerusalem. And there was this broad conviction that the end of time had come, and that all these doctrines had a peculiar imminence. Paul seems to have generally shared this belief. He does not seem to have had any clear vision of the unfoldment of a church over a long historic period. He does not seem to have provided any machinery, for instance, for the actual descent of the apostolic succession, or any of the other important issues that later confronted theology. He does, however, give us, as I've said, a concept of Christianity that immediately escapes history, and therefore could be perpetuated even though the end of the world did not come. Perhaps we may feel that the end of a world did come, and that there was such a great and important change in the entire tonality of human civilization, that an old order or an old way of life or an old era or an old age did something. In any event, however, the Gospels are filled with the emergencies of the moment. These are extended through the Acts and through a large part of the pastoral epistles. Things are imminent, things are immediate. And the long-range provisions that should have been made were not made. Perhaps this is the reason why no one at that time really believed a long-range plan to be either necessary or possible. Certainly all these elements have played their part in the integration of this early concept. In summarizing, therefore, the Christ whom St. Paul preached, whose message was in his letters and epistles, was a spiritual power abiding in faith, a principle of universal salvation, a principle to be known not by words alone, nor by writing, but by the quickening of the Spirit within, a being universal in its availability, a being to whom men of many nations, races, and languages could pray in their own tongues and in their own places, and they would be heard. The older writings have very little suspicion of this, noted in them at all. It is Paul, therefore, who actually placed mysticism, the powerful expression of an internal mystical revelation, in the foreground of the faith. To him, the Christ was the extension of the Godhead, a divine and eternal principle which overshadows the man Jesus, who became its instrument but was not its substance. And Paul went further in his assumption that this same spiritual principle, this eternal Christos, could anoint others, could reach into their hearts, could quicken them into life through the quickness and fullness of faith, and that therefore the mystery of Christ was available to all men, and that this mystery was available to them in their own understanding, in their own ways of life, in their own community, and that the important thing by which this mystery might be expected to occur was the obedience to the great concept of a spiritual truth and reality. That faith and obedience were the great powers which made this illumination possible. The experience of Paul on the road to Damascus also entered into another phase of his public ministry. We find Paul in his effort to distinguish what was good. He knew within himself, in a mysterious way, that of all men he was probably the least worthy to have received the vision that was denied to even the apostles themselves. He, the man who was on his way to persecute the Christian community, who had hated the Christians with a bitter and vindictive rage, not probably a personal rage, but a rage of indignation because of his own religious beliefs. This man who had no good in his heart toward Christ or toward Jesus was the one to whom the most blessed and wonderful of mysteries had occurred. This was most disorienting because it attacked the very basis of what might be termed the philosophical systems of the Greeks, to which Paul had a natural inclination. It became the basis of the arguments later of the Emperor Julian against the Christians, because the entire Pauline perspective was burdened with a strange quality that was apparently, at least, hopelessly inconsistent. And it was simply this: Paul preached that men must love Christ in order to be Christ. He had hated Christ and was Christ. Now, this was a situation. It undermined in his own nature his understanding of the machinery by which spiritual regeneration was possible. He suddenly was faced with the appalling fact, at least it must have been appalling to a man who had a trained philosophic mind, the appalling fact that apparently good has nothing to do with it. We find this appearing later in the Pauline Epistles, where Paul admonishes those who realize that it is not possible for man to earn salvation by his own works, that he must earn it only by the grace of God. The salvation is bestowed. It is not earned in the ordinary sense of the word. But like a flash of lightning, it descends according to the divine will. It must, because that is the only way it could have happened to Paul. He could not have stood up and claimed to have merited it. And we do not know just what kind of life he lived before the conversion, even on other levels of his character. We know he must have been a highly emotional and very intense human being. Thus, all of these things are mysteries in the Spirit and mysteries in God, which transcend human understanding. And so with Paul, the blessing of salvation is something that is beyond man's ability to know or comprehend. Yet at the same time, Paul recognized or realized in his own sober moral moment that this could not be so far, at least not exclusively. The reward for the virtuous life, for the Christian life, must be advanced as important. Paul was constantly counseling the living of a good life to all the group who received his epistles. Yet through all of this flashes this strange and incredible experience of his own, in which the greatest sinner has become the greatest saint. Therefore, in some way, the sinner and the saint must have something in common. And the Lord, in his wondrous working, raises up the unworthy and casts down the great. And these things are beyond human understanding. So at a certain point in almost all of his thinking, Paul reaches the circumference of human understanding. Then he is lost, and the rest must depend upon the grace of God. Thus we have this teaching which later resulted in numerous complications in the Christian world, because it emphasized the inconsistency of the greatest sinner being the greatest saint, and caused Julian to ask why it was that in the non-Christian rites men were accepted only because of high moral character, whereas the Christian communion invited the sinner and the backslider and said he was peculiarly welcome. This conflict continued on and did not end until the final closing of the pagan schools in the Roman Empire about the 6th century by the Emperor Justinian. Thus we see that Paul's philosophy was shattered, broken, and a bit fragmentary by the time he began to really integrate his various writings. And his answer was the inevitable answer of the mystery, namely that these things happen, that they happen by the will of God, and that man must accept this will. And so we find him preaching self-abnegation, humility, preaching the rejection of all worldly knowledge, preaching the rejection of worldly honors, and the complete dedication of the individual to the fulfillment of his inner spiritual emergency. The epistles then unfold with the various admonitions which became essentially the teachings of the church. Gradually, Paul intensified the boundaries of orthodoxy. He made it stronger and stronger what the Christian could do and could not do in terms of the community of non-Christians which surrounded him. Most of all, he must attempt to preserve with purity this mystical tradition which had been given to him. Paul also became concerned with the problem of the resurrection of the flesh and the nature of the state of man after death. This is one point on which the church has never actually come to any general understanding. In fact, the church itself has refused to make any statement concerning the condition of man after death except such statements as might be reasonably or rationally inferred by the doctrine itself. In the beginning, there was no actual discussion of perdition. The concept of lost souls came in quite a bit later. The after-death state of the devout Christian was simply described by the 1st century and 2nd century authors, writers, as being the extension of the pious man's life beyond the grave. The acceptance of immortality is implied, but not clarified. It is, however, sufficiently present to justify most of the Church's feelings and doctrines about it. The earliest doctrine was that after death, the devout Christian would pass into a world in which he was nearer to God, in which his own inner sensitivities and abilities to know and understand and appreciate and worship and venerate would all be intensified. That by the very fact of death, his enlargement of knowledge of spiritual things would follow. And therefore, that in his after-death state, he was nearer to God, nearer to truth, and more capable of conscious obedience to the divine will. That summarizes approximately the first opinion of the Christian communion on this subject. The Christian belief had a place beyond the grave. A house of many mansions, in which the redeemed and those who had served or had been martyred would find reward and recompense. The early Christian communion, up as late as the 3rd century, definitely and distinctly believed in the physical resurrection of the flesh. They went so far as to preserve the bodies of their dead in a crystalline fluid. They did not, like the Egyptians, remove the viscera and embalm, because they believed this would interfere with the resurrection of the flesh. But up to the 2nd and 3rd centuries, this doctrine was strongly held, for it was believed that the end of the world was imminent, and that the baptized, those who had died in the faith, would rise in the bodies which they had occupied. Therefore, the early Christian communion also forbade the cremation of the dead. Later, of course, following the development of the Pauline concept, most of these beliefs were subject to interpretation. And by interpretation, the literal implications were gradually modified. But actually, in the beginning, there is every reason to know that these beliefs were simple, direct, and extremely literal. As an escape from these literalisms, and as an invitation to a larger approach to the entire situation, we should take into consideration the apocalyptic writings, and particularly the revelation of St. John the Divine. We are not sure of the exact time at which the book of the Revelation was written. The best guesses that we have at the moment place it about the end of the 1st century. In other words, between the years 90 and 110 AD. We are not sure of the author, although the tradition attributing it to St. John has a respectable antiquity. It is supposed to have been written upon the Isle of Patmos. And as surely as the Epistles differ from the Gospels, so the Apocalypse differs from them both. The Apocalypse stands almost completely alone among the New Testament writings, and if anything, has more of the flash of Isaiah and Ezekiel than it has of the New Testament authors. The author of this work was undeniably and unquestionably a mystic. Just to what degree his mysticism was Orthodox Christianity is open to a large dispute, because there is very much in the work that suggests heavy indebtedness to other beliefs. Perhaps the Apocalypse can best be described as a cross-section of the beliefs of that time, and it has also been suggested that it was written primarily to bridge the interval between the rising Christian community and the great structure of the pagan mysteries then collapsing in the Near East and North Africa. No doubt whatever that the author of the Apocalypse was telling us a story very much more complicated than that of the apostles and the disciples. Yes, there is a definite indication in the Apocalypse that the author was indebted to St. Paul. Although, generally speaking, the writings of John belong to a little different group, and John and Peter and Paul never got along well together. Actually, the Apocalypse is one of the most difficult books in the world to interpret. The reason being that it is an intense polyglot, and derives a confusion of emblems and symbols from a number of other sources. as early as the 3rd century, it was alleged that the Apocalypse had been influenced by Hindu and Far Eastern doctrines, and many of the early writers felt its indebtedness to the Persian mysteries. Certainly, the Apocalypse was a product of this melting pot of beliefs. It was a syncretic work. And if we could imagine ourselves today, with our present perspective, in a world such as that in which the Apocalypse was written, we would say that it was a work on comparative religion, that it was definitely created to bind up the wounds which had divided the faiths of the past, and in a way to archly intimate that Christianity was the summation of the spiritual convictions of man, and not a new religion. I think this is one of the strongest points that is held in the overtones of the Apocalypse. The writer is trying to tell us that all prophecies, all mysteries, all great systems of ancient ritual and doctrine were fulfilled in the Christian dispensation, and that the Christian Messiah was the one whose coming and whose rulership over the quick and the dead had been promised since the beginning of time. This means one of two things, and there's a little question here, but the answers are reasonably probable. In the first place, it could be that certain changes were made in the book of Revelation, by which it was tied to Christianity and that it was not actually a Christian writing. This, however, seems a little doubtful. It seems more likely that the author carried this miscellaneous information within his own consciousness, and in his own mind pointed it in the direction of the faith to which he held allegiance. Now, what are the elements that we can definitely trace? A few of them. For it is in this rite that we have the Hierophant standing in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, holding the jewel of stars, girdled in white, with a two-edged sword coming from his mouth. This emblem is taken directly from one of the earlier systems of religion. The last judgment is Egyptian, and the ritual of the psychostasia, of the weighing of the soul, is certainly derived from the Egyptian rite. The small stone upon which is written the name which none may read but the one to whom it is given is borrowed directly from the Greek rites of Epistles. For it was in this rite that the patrona, or small stone bearing the name of the candidate, was used, and its symbolism explained and identified. The 4 horsemen of the Apocalypse most certainly refer to the 4 yugas of Hindu philosophy, that follow each other like the Greek ages of gold and silver, bronze and iron. All of these symbolisms can be traced without great difficulty to their original sources. Now, there's been a strong tendency in the last 200 or 300 years to attempt to interpret the Apocalypse as a prophetic work, relating to the descent of nations and kingdoms, and the attempt to identify the various beasts and monsters of that book with kingdoms and nations and empires of the historical world. I think that this is a wrong interpretation. I do not think the original author had such a concept because he was also a millennialist. He did not expect the world to last another 100 years. His predictions and prophecies dealt with a symbolism within himself, and this symbolism is an effort to unfold the mysteries
of the universe as they were understood and known in his time. Two possibilities develop in connection with the study of the Apocalypse. Either that these visions themselves were highly symbolical, that in dreams and visions, which could be explained perhaps today on the level of analytical psychology, the scribe faithfully reported that which had appeared in his inner consciousness. The second possibility here, that he himself created or applied symbolism to conceal or to partly reveal meanings, and that he was consciously and intentionally drawing symbolic pictures to conceal the actual facts which he wished to secretly perpetuate. Both of these concepts have some merit. Certainly we know that the story of the Apocalypse is based upon the Greek and early Latin concept of the universe as preserved in the phenomenon of Aratus of Sole and the sphere of Miscellaneous. Aratus of Sole, who was one of the great astronomers, his work was evidently known to St. Paul, because he is the only pagan author quoted by St. Paul. And the line, "and we are his children," is taken from Aratus of Sole. The Aratus concept of the universe was what we know today as the geocentric concept. And the revelation of John creates a series of symbolism involving this concept. The universe is divided into three sections, of which the lowest is elementary, consisting of the spheres of the four elements, earth, fire, air, and water, represented by the cherub of Ezekiel and by the mysterious Merkaba of ancient Jewish mysticism. Above the orbits or levels of the elements are the orbits of the seven planets, as represented by Aratus of Sole. In this system, the sun occupied the fourth orbit, and the orbits consisted of those of the moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. These were the seven planets known to the ancients. Above and outside of these was the great wall of heaven, the firmament, which was itself divisible into three distinguishable layers, of which definitions are left to us partly by philosophers as early as Pythagoras, and finally coordinated and integrated by Ptolemy of Alexandria. These three were called moved upon each other, these three orbits beyond the planets, and were called the firmament or the celestial orbits, or the first motions of the stars, for it was here that the fixed stars had their thrones. Beyond and above the orbits of the fixed stars was a wall encircling the entire solar system, which was held within a sphere, represented by the Egyptians by the use of the symbolism of a transverse section of an onion. These were concentric rings surrounded by a wall or shell, like the shell of an egg. And outside of that shell, beyond the sphere of the fixed stars, was the empyrean, or the heaven world. And in this heaven world was the celestial city of the eternal God. And this city was on the shores of the Shemayim. And the Shemayim was the water which is above the firmament, or the crystal sea, which is described in the Apocalypse. For it says in Genesis that the waters which are above the firmament were divided from the waters which are beneath the firmament. And the Shemayim was the superior water of heaven, or the water of life, which flowed forever from the throne of the eternal. And here, surrounded by the mysterious symbols of the cherubim, on a great and golden throne, before which knelt 24 elders, was the eternal Spirit of God, and in the presence of God was the Lamb. And the Lamb had 7 horns and 7 eyes. And the whole symbolism is distinctly in line with the Mithraic rites of Persia and certain of the mysteries of the Greeks as set forth by the various Neoplatonists a little later. And of the Neoplatonists, particularly Iamblichus, in his discussion of the universe, and Porphyry in his Cave of the Nymphs, which was a study of the submundane universe. Now this remarkable concept becomes the great key to the Apocalypse. And as you study it more carefully, you begin to recognize that John's vision consisted of his ascending a ladder, a mysterious ladder of 7 rungs, representing the orbits of the 7 planets. And these planets were also the 7 churches in Asia. And each of these planets can definitely be identified with the names and attributes of the 7 churches. These planets and the churches are also the 7 seals of the Revelation, which must be opened. And to an Eastern student, the 7 seals certainly tie very closely with the 7 disciplines of Vedanta and Yoga. The seals by means of which the conscious powers of the seer could be quickened and opened. And when John had ascended through the orbits of the 7 planets, he came to the little door in heaven, through which he passed through into the empyrean and beheld the mystery of the universe. A parallel of earlier days is the story of Istar at the 7 gates, and her descent into the underworld to rescue Tammuz, who had died and was imprisoned by the god of the moon in the sublunary region. A little later, the apocryphal description of Muhammad's night journey to heaven contains much parallel information. Riding upon a mysterious monster, part man, part horse, and part bird, called Al-Borak, the flash of lightning, Muhammad made the night journey and arrived upon this mount in his dream, which carried him to the stone Moriah on the threshing floor of the ancient Temple of Solomon. And here on the ancient threshing floor of the Jebusites, Muhammad alighted from the mysterious beast that carried him and stood in prayer waiting. And as he prayed, a ladder of silken cords fell from heaven. And Muhammad ascended the ladder and passed through each of the 7 gates. And at each gate was one of the prophets. And when Muhammad reached the 6th gate, there was Jesus. But of course, in the good terms of the Koran, for the Muslim, only Muhammad could pass the 7th gate. But the same allegory, the same symbolism, the signification of the ascent of consciousness through 7 levels to internal seership, all of this is clearly indicated in the Apocalypse. Thus, we have reason to assume something which up to the present time has not been assumed by the majority of Christian scholars, namely that it is very likely and possible that an apocalyptic brotherhood or order existed at that time. In other words, as early as the 1st century, there was a secret doctrine in Christendom, a doctrine that differs from that of the traditional belief. This would be all the more reasonable because it already existed in the Jewish beliefs, and Christianity at that time would certainly have been influenced by the Jewish division of learning. As the Jewish doctrine had an inner mystical and an outer legal code, so Christianity might very well, and probably did possess, an outer historical and an inner apocalyptical mystery. We know that scenes from the Apocalypse were performed as early as the 3rd and 4th century as theatrical productions. And it is most likely that this work, much like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, was originally a ritual. used in the communication of certain secret teachings. Here we have also supporting influence from the Gnosis. And Gnostic Christianity has been pressed back by the recent discoveries near Talamara in Egypt, and is now known to be much earlier than was originally thought, particularly its religious books. Part of the books of the Savior and the Pistis contain these discourses given in secret by Jesus only to certain selected disciples and immediate followers. And we have an authority for that, even in the Gospels, where it is said that Jesus taught the multitude in parables, but to his disciples he taught certain other things. What those other things are, the Gospels do not tell us. But the pseudo-Gospels and the Gnostic writings affirm that these things which he taught were the true secrets of his faith, and that these true secrets, as unfolded by the Gnostic Gospels, are exceedingly reminiscent of the apocalyptical story, because they are presented much in the same spirit of high fantasy and symbolism. They are presented as wonderful mystical experiences of consciousness. Thus, the Apocalypse may very well, like the book of Genesis, have at one time been used as a ritual. The precedent for that is also in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, for we know definitely that this was used in the mysteries, as Dr. Preston told me in Chicago, that a papyrus of the Book of the Dead has been found on the margins of which are the prompter's marks for the actors. So we know that the production was dramatized. And we have every reason to assume that as the Apocalypse consists of a dozen or more segments from other faiths that were dramatized in their originals, that the entire work might be intended to be dramatized as a great syncretic document, leading to the Gnostic and later the Neoplatonic conviction that all these spiritual revelations were identical, that only the names were changed, and that there was only one great world doctrine of salvation. Plato sensed this, Paul acknowledged it, and it certainly could be interpreted as being a large part of the burden of the Apocalypse. What the Apocalypse means to the average person requires a fair understanding of Christianity as it existed in the close of the Ante-Nicene period. We've already mentioned the great Council of Nicaea, which resulted in the gradual establishment of the canon. But prior to this period, we know, as I have said, that the boundaries of the faith were indistinct, and that therefore a number of other beliefs and doctrines were imposed upon it to become so completely identical with it that it is almost impossible to distinguish the various degrees of originality. We may, however, definitely assume from the Gnosis and from other early sources, for example, that it was not until about the year AD 60 that the followers of this new faith were called Christians. And that was only one mention of it. It occurred once, known to have been so used. Not before and not again for more than 100 years. This one reference, therefore, indicates an important point, but does not establish a solution to our problem. Otherwise, the entire group was always referred to as the group of the Nazarenes. The original name of the Christian communion was the Nazarenes. The Nazarenes were therefore held in some ill repute because of the fact that that group and that area had been notable for the production of visionaries, mystics, and those of doubtful orthodoxy under the Jewish law. The Nazarene communion, therefore, was a Jewish communion with progressive, somewhat non-Jewish ideas. These ideas took greater and greater form until finally they broke away. But that break was not completed even during the lifetime of Paul. It comes considerably later. But the breaking away was continuing. Now we know that at that time, these churches or communions were so isolated and so far removed from each other that undoubtedly some of them were totally lost. Gradually, the various faiths of the area absorbed them. But in so doing, absorbed also some of their ideas, so that we had a number of schismatic groups representing minglings of Christian and non-Christian beliefs in various proportions. If the Christian proportion dominated, the group was simply heretical. If the Christian proportion did not dominate at all, then the group remained essentially pagan. But there were many levels and degrees of the Christian communion at that time. Now let us, for the purpose of our general survey of our purpose and our picture, go back now and attempt to make a composite picture out of the entire subject of this series of talks, so that we will take away something that makes a story. We have discussed the Pentateuch, by which the Jewish law was established under the Torah or the books of Moses. That this law essentially was the law of a monotheistic deism, a law which declared that the law of God and the law of man were identical. And that the entire system of Jewish life, personal, religious, economic, industrial, historical, was based upon the religious concepts and writings. That the Torah, or the law, was followed by a great unfoldment, and that this unfoldment developed through the application of the laws to the psychological emergency of the Jewish nation, which gradually developed and resulted in the development of the prophetic and mystical writings, which we now associate with the patriarchs and the prophets. That in turn, the entire story gradually took upon itself a mystical atmosphere, and the emergencies and needs of the Jewish soul in bondage, the tremendous pressures of persecution on the outside, the intense distress due to uncertainty of how their God could leave them naked to their enemies, resulted gradually in the rise of a strong mystical tradition in Israel, a tradition which was consummated later in the Kabbalah and the Mishnah. And that this mystical tradition has as probably its most complete unfoldment the story of King Solomon's temple and the building of the universal house of mankind. We then move into the New Testament pattern, where we contact, first of all, the Gospels as we know them. And here we find a strong and powerful revision of the Torah. We find the emergence of a teacher, known to Christianity as Jesus of Nazareth, known probably to the Talmud as Jehoshua ben Pantera, a man who attempted not to go against the law and the prophets, but to fulfill them, and who taught a powerful doctrine developed from the sources of the Nazarene and the Essenes. But this man's great message was liberation of Israel by the transference of the weight of value from the success in this world to the storing up of treasures in an eternal world, where thieves could not break in and where rust would not destroy. So we have from the great sorrow of man the emergence of the man of sorrow. We find the great need for spiritual consolation in the Near East producing from itself a tremendous regenerating force, a force exemplified by a king of the Jews, whose kingdom was not of this world. A reference perhaps to the great expectation, the great hope, that that which suffers and fails in this world, if it is still true to its principles, will live on to glory. But that the burdens which we carry and for which we see no release prepare us for a better life than we have ever known. This was the burden of the beginning of this concept. And all through this we are dealing with one package. We are dealing with the package of the struggle of Israel, its struggle through bondage, its struggle through the captivities, its struggle against Rome, and finally the crushing defeat of Israel, the fall of the kingdom of Judea and the diaspora, or the scattering of Israel, and the end of the political, social identity of this people. In this critical moment, when the worst had happened, when the entire background of Judaism was falling away from those who were passing through this great tribulation, we find the arising of the second act of the drama which ties together the whole picture of the Old and New Testament. This second act is the introduction of the character of St. Paul. Here we have a man by race Jewish, by station a Roman, by learning a Greek. We have a man in whose nature many streams of concept and belief mingle. We find this man stepping into a situation. He stepped into it probably out of urgency. He was convinced that the disciples did not have the vision of the significance of the life of Jesus. He was also convinced that this life of Jesus was not even in itself the significant thing. That there was something else, and that this something else was revealed in one single incredible instant in the theophany. That there was a power in the universe, the Logos, that in the twinkling of an eye could make all things new. That there was in space a tremendous redeeming power. And that this redeeming power, this inevitable that could step in and change all things and make all sickness well again, that this tremendous redeeming power was actually the love of God. And that this love of God was conjured into existence by love for God. And this perhaps was St. Paul's great consolation. For when he persecuted the Christians, he did it for love of his God. Therefore, actually love suffered long and a time. And this mystery of the reward for devotion, even if it is misplaced, seemed to have struck Paul desperately, with great earnestness and importance. And as a result of that, he became conscious of a universal good, a universal reality, which he may have already sensed in pre-Christian studies in other schools and systems. Perhaps he also realized that this power that had come to him had been previously reported of men like Pythagoras. That these divine men were divine because of a tremendous divine power moving through them. He experienced this power. And in the experiencing of it, he discovered that neither words nor symbols were adequate. That nothing could be done except this tremendous, complete acceptance. And that this, in some mysterious way, was the true Christianity. That this was the lesson that Jesus sought to teach, but which the disciples did not understand. They saw him, Jesus, as a man. Paul saw him as a mystery. And that this mystery was actually the mystery of the love of God. And that it was this love of God that sustained Jesus and made possible to him the complete sacrifice of his life for that divine love. And that the Christian, therefore, or one Christ, is one in whose spirit, soul, and understanding abideth now these three: hope, faith, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Now, in the Old Bible, we may use the word charity. But this is from charitas, which actually means not to give somebody something, but to cherish, and is another form of the word love. So that love, rather than charity, is a correct translation of the original. And so Paul experienced in the theophany the sudden and immediate and complete, unquestioned love of life. Love of this mysterious thing which had overwhelmed him with its mercy and overwhelmed him with its love even while he hated. And out of this came the dream that Paul attempted to expand through his great missionary journeys and through his preaching to the whole world. He taught that wisdom was not so important, but the important thing was the simple and complete act of religious love. That in some mysterious way, love releases. And that which it releases is God's love in all things. And so Paul sought to teach an experience in God, a lifting up in the Spirit. For if this love of God in man is lifted up, it will draw all things unto it. And this love is the second logos, the heart of God. And God redeems his world by sending forth his love into the world. And this love took flesh and was born among men. And men did not receive it, did not know it, did not understand it. But to such as did understand, he was given the blessing and the boon of eternal life. And Paul believed firmly and definitely that this love power comes not to man, but through man, because of its abidance within his own nature. Paul, we were working from the Greek angle of philosophy, recognizing a God in man, declared man's own purified and regenerated love to be the only begotten of his own Godhood. And that as God had created him, so love would perfect and redeem him. So all things that were created by wisdom and strength were perfected by love. And therefore, that love, in a spiritual sense, is the Savior, the Regenerator, and the Redeemer of all life. This was the burden and substance of his message. But he had so many trials, so many tribulations, so many wars and struggles with his churches, with his communion, and with the backsliding members of his group, that always he is extolling, always he is entreating, always he is demanding. But under it all is this vast concept of the creative, redemptive power of sincere, unselfish love of God, manifested always and forever through man's love of man. Thus love became to him more important than any other form of wisdom. And he considered it the perfect wisdom that man should love perfectly all things. And when man turned his love inward, sought the contemplation of God, and experienced through love God's presence within himself, then he too had a theophany, for he beheld the love of God advancing to him out of the mysterious dimensions of his own soul, as Paul beheld a vision upon the road to Damascus. Now Paul, having conceived this tremendous structure of the Christian mystery of a universal power of redemption, from the beginning of time. A power which, through the love of God, incidentally, preserved all peoples prior to the advent of Christ. For up to that time, all good men were saved for the love of God. And because of God's infinite love, no good man who did not know the way of Christ could be lost. This was an important doctrine of the early church that was forgotten all too soon. And out of this also then arises the consummation, or the third act of this mysterious and wonderful tragedy and drama, and that is the unfoldment of the apocalyptical vision. For in the apocalyptical part, we see or dimly perceive the outlines of the great scientific mystical structure, which was lacking in the Gospels and not evident in the Pauline epistles. Here we suddenly see beneath the robes and garments of the faith the structure of bones and nerves and arteries and veins, by means of which this thing was a living body. And this living body consisted of the presence and existence of a discipline, of a system secretly derived from the great religions of the world, whereby the unfoldment of man and the perfection of his nature and the enlightenment of his service of universal love could be achieved. And I think that our basic concept there could be clarified by the simple statement that Jesus admonished all his people and his children to love one another. Paul taught men to love Christ, or the universal principle of love. But it remained for the apocalypse to define love. Here was the thing that was missing. We have all tried to love. We have tried to love on a human level, and we have tried to love on a religious level, but we are somewhat confused. We do not know what love is. We perhaps learn most of it in moments when we most forget ourselves in the service of others. But still, the perfection of love, the direction of its full measure and intensity upon those things totally worthy, demands the same that we have in the Orient and in other parts of the world, and that is the development of a great system of discrimination, that we may choose the right, and that we may have the courage, the strength, the wisdom, and the understanding to know what is right, even though we desire unselfishly to serve and preserve the right. We must all, as Lincoln said, serve the right as it is given to us to know the right. But the disciplines of the apocalypse remind us that there is a way by which the individual, through internal development, can come into the conscious knowledge of God's will, and therefore attain the consciousness of obedience. That up to that time men see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. And this is, of course, the difference in the ancient rites between the mystai and the apotai. In the Grecian mysteries, the lesser rites, the candidate was placed before a veil through which he could dimly see the altar beyond. The mystai were those, therefore, or the mystics who saw through a mist or through an obscuration. But the apotai were those who saw face to face, and from whom the veil had been removed. And this, of course, is again a rather definite indication that Paul was acquainted with the rites of the Epistolian mysteries. But in the Apocalypse, we find the story and the study of the complete internal mystery of human regeneration, set forth in the strange symbolical sciences of the ancient religious rites. Thus we find in the Apocalypse that which is necessary to complete the system. And that, of course, is the exact way by which an end can be accomplished. In the Gospels, we have Christianity as a religion. In the Epistles, we have Christianity as philosophy. And in the Apocalypse, where is the last place you would ever expect to find it, you have Christianity as a science. But the science is concealed in symbols, in secret language, in order that the rules, because they are inevitable and inflexible if properly used, will not pass into the keeping of those who are unworthy. So the more exact the system, the more completely it is hidden by symbolism. But in the Apocalypse, we have the story of the internal transformation of human consciousness, just as surely as we have it in the Uttara Gita and in the great commentaries of Yoga and Vedanta. Thus we have in the Christian situation a complete picture. A picture which derives its cosmogony originally from the Old Testament, its anthropology from the New Testament, and its psychology in the prophetic writings of both Testaments. We have the story of the gradual building up of a great syncretic doctrine. A doctrine which must sometimes be re-unfolded or brought back again into the understanding and knowledge of men by painstakingly reversing the system by means of which it was obscured. This means that through the study of comparative religion, we are coming into a fuller understanding of biblical meaning. It means, therefore, that through the mingling of various religions of the East and West, through the increasing understanding of East-West religious and philosophical indebtedness, little by little, the concept of a great coming world religion begins to emerge. And this is the concept that was lurking in the soul of St. Paul. And that is that in the great religion of mankind, we would find the mystery of the absolute religious identity of love. That love in all faiths is the same. And that love of God is the supreme faith and the common denominator of all worship. And therefore, that those who worship true love are the servants of the Logos. And if this Logos is called in Christendom the Christos, or the Anointed One, it is also the Maitreya of Buddhism, which desires before all nations. It is Ahmed, the mysterious Messiah to come of Islam. It is any and all things that relate to the preservation and salvation of the world through good. Because if love be elevated, raised up to the first place among all things, it will draw all men unto it. And in the simple and tremendous exposition of a doctrine of salvation through the available love of God, manifested through love for God and man, we have the complete statement of a mystical experience. This was the experience which Paul felt. This was the experience that he could only put into the words of his time and place. But he knew that it was timeless and placeless. He sensed that. And by that sensing, he gave us the beginnings of a greater possibility for the Christian faith. And he also gave the world a faith that could grow and could survive 20 centuries. A faith which in turn must continue to grow until it reveals from itself that which is its great secret, namely Christ in a mystery. And that mystery is universal love as the panacea of all the world's woes. And the new heaven and the new earth, the Son of Man coming in glory. For this Son of Man who is to rule over and redeem the 144,000 of the saved represents love, which is the firstborn of the God in man, and the firstborn God-man in the world. Thus love to Paul was the Logos, power which took creation and perfected it, which brought it back again, fulfilling the mysterious curse of Eden, making possible the resurrection of the spirit and the flesh. And even today we know that the very sick flesh has been resurrected by love alone. And so love suffers long in its time, and it fulfills its works, and it achieves all things, and it comes in glory to rule all men in the day of the great transformation. And this is the secret of peace. This is Paul's answer. But the final solution to all things is that when men should love one another, in that day the golden age is reborn. That is the millennium. And it does not come because men have not attained it. It cannot come until it comes as it did Paul, through a mystery in the Spirit, through something that happens along the long road of life, a vision, a sudden stroke in darkness, a sudden voice speaking out the pathway which we follow, a voice calling us to a higher destiny. But Paul's life is itself highly symbolical. Man's resistance to truth and his final acceptance of it. And in the complete picture of the Bible, therefore, we have two great pillars, the law and love. The greatest of these is love. And in the old dispensation, we have the dispensation of a universe ruled by sovereign law. The new dispensation, the universe ruled by love. But not a love that breaks the law, but a love that fulfills the law. And a love in man which makes him realize that the law is lovable, and that all things which the law demands of man, he should graciously bestow of himself by love of God, so that man by love learns to obey, and in so doing, the law is transformed into grace. This, it seems, is the burden of the story, and more time and thought can be expended upon it. But this is the best we can do with you in the time that we have. And we thank you very much for being with us for this series, and hope that you have found it worthwhile.
That Paul was responsible for the emergence of the doctrine of the Christhood, as distinguished from the teachings of the disciples, is now universally acknowledged. Also that Paul, because of this difference within himself, approached the entire problem of Christianity from a different level, even in the beginning. He was not unique in this level, others followed him. And the position taken by Paul was also accepted by nearly all of the classical scholars of the period, or the first few centuries of Christendom, who came into the faith from a high level of personal intellectual attainment, such as Dionysius of Alexandria, who became a Christian bishop, but remained a Platonist throughout life. This level was accessible to Paul, who from his writings and from his interpretation was obviously familiar with the writings of the classical Greek school. His very familiarity with these other systems caused him to be regarded with great suspicion by the other disciples, who felt that he was already taking away from them the intimate, personal concept of Jesus. Thus we have two distinct Christianities arising in the first century, and marked by certain collisions of doctrine and belief. One of these we will call the Jewish Christian communion, which was strongly represented by St. Peter. And the other was the Hellenistic or Greek Christian communion that was always under the leadership of Paul or the Pauline teachers that followed him. Thus, sometime before the year 60 A.D., there was already a strong division within the body of the Christian community. This division never completely closed, and later at the Council of Nicaea and the Council of Constantinople, this great widen to result in the gradual emergence of the Eastern and Western churches. The Western Church with its see at Rome, and the Eastern Church, Greek Orthodox, with its see in Byzantium. Thus, the very division of the Roman Empire gradually brought this clear line of demarcation between the two systems of thought. Another point which we must bring up in connection with St. Paul, because it has a bearing upon our subject, was his important journey to Athens as a teacher and apostle to the Athenians. And it is at that point that we find that interesting and remarkable episode of St. Paul at the altar of the unknown God. This again has been subject to a great deal of study. And there has been a question as to exactly how this should be interpreted. Tremendous emotional crisis completely changed the manner, the life, the purpose, the conviction of this remarkable person. From that time on, he became the devout and almost fanatical follower of the voice that he had heard in the vision. This has an important bearing upon our subject, because Paul now emerges as a person following a doctrine, not as the apostles who had known and lived with Jesus as a man, but following the doctrine of a voice that had come in a vision, surrounded by light, which had shattered his inner frame and reduced him in an instant to complete humility. Thus Paul's concept of Jesus and the Christian ministry is vastly different from that of the apostles. The disciples had lived and had many years labored with Jesus. Their own opinions of him were somewhat diversified, that even the most faithful could not keep vigil with him for a single night. These men, the disciples, were very personal in their attitude. And from what we can gather from the Gospels, regarded Jesus as a rabbi, a teacher, a member of the Jewish community. Paul's attitude was quite different. This attitude brought him into violent conflict with St. Peter and resulted in a great deal of division between himself and members of the original group. But Paul's contribution was unique because of this important difference, that he had not known Jesus in the flesh. It was therefore possible for him to achieve a strange internal impersonality. This impersonality, this detachment, this transformation by the theophany of the concept of Jesus from a man, from a teacher, to a spirit, to a being in space, resulted in what is called the Christology of St. Paul. This Christology undoubtedly contributed a tremendous impulse to the future of the Christian religion. It broke through the barrier of time and changed the perspective from that of a generation in which these incidents occurred, and transformed the entire Christian concept from a series of happenings in Judea into a great mystery of the Spirit which could extend through all nations and times and could bind men of 100 centuries together in a belief which was essentially a spiritual mystery of God. Far less dramatic, and in the terms of Roman law, most reasonable. As a Roman citizen, Saul of Tarsus would have had a Roman name. He would have had Jewish names among his own people, but he would have had a Roman name as a Roman citizen. And it is almost certain that the name of Paul is the result of the fact that he was a citizen of the Roman Empire. Paul's life was a strange contradiction. He was well educated. There was a very important center of training, knowledge, and culture at Tarsus. He later studied in the rabbinical school in Jerusalem. He spoke Greek, we know, and his writings have been compared favorably with the orations of Cicero. Thus, we have a man of extraordinary talent. We also have a man of remarkable personality. Apparently, a man of intense emotional pressure. A man who probably today would be regarded as neurotic. A man in whose life nothing could be done moderately. A man of intensities and extremes. So we find him first persecuting the Christians. We believe that there is ground for the opinion that he physically attacked and brutally St. John. He did it, however, without question, on motives of the greatest sincerity. In the confused period of history in which these events took place, there was a great deal of conflict between various groups and levels. Paul firmly believed that the Christian community was a menace to the Jewish state and the Jewish faith. And he appointed himself as a defender of the old order. And therefore was perfectly willing to see the Christian community discomfited and destroyed. He was on his way to Damascus for the purpose of destroying a Christian communion, when the mysterious episode which is known in theology as the Theophany occurred. It was here that the vision, or the illumination, or the appearance of the divine came to him, struck him temporarily blind, and cast him helpless and hopeless from the earth. It was at that time that he heard the words, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? As far as we can learn, Paul never knew, met, or even saw Jesus during his lifetime. His only contact with him was through the Theophany. And we are not convinced from the records that are available whether Paul says that he saw Jesus in the Spirit or merely heard him and felt his presence. But in any event, this influence of the words of St. Paul. There are exceptions also in the minor pastoral works, such as Jude and John. But in substance, these epistles relate to the life and ministry of Saul of Tarsus. And we must pause, therefore, to examine in a little detail at least the place of St. Paul in the descent of the New Testament tradition. If we are critical, we realize that the epistles of Paul were written between the years 58 and 65 AD. The exact dating is probably impossible. But due to the references which relate to historical matters, we have this degree of orientation. Now we also approach a number of problems in connection with Paul. One of the most important of which is the psychological estimation of this apostle to the Gentiles. Saul of Tarsus was perhaps the best educated, most broadly learned, of those who formed the early circle of Christian leaders. Paul's position was that of a man undoubtedly conversant with pre-Christian religious rites and ceremonies. His entire psychology is dominated by one important circumstance, namely that of all the disciples and early apostles, he alone was a citizen of Rome. Now this is a far more vital point than might first be imagined. To understand it, we must proceed, as in most cases of biblical criticism, away from sacred writings to a study of Roman law. And this opens an entirely new field. The city of Tarsus opened its gates to Rome without resistance. And as a result of that, the citizens of Tarsus were made honorary citizens of the Roman Empire. Among those so treated was Saul's father. And naturally, Saul was therefore born a Roman citizen. Now there has been a great deal of interpretation and study about the change of Saul's name from Saul to Paul. Some have assumed that this was a result of his conversion. Others have taken the attitude that it was a highly symbolical gesture on his own part, in which he proclaimed himself the least among the servants of God. Actually, our answer is probably much similar. Now the question may naturally be asked, why is Bible scholarship necessary? On the moral level of Christianity, it is not necessary. But, as the student increases his own knowledge, he becomes naturally desirous of understanding things which he has previously accepted or perhaps rejected. Secondly, a critical study of the Bible immediately introduces us to the larger field of comparative religion. This is important because it helps to liberate the mind from certain limitations which cannot be known or appreciated or understood until we begin to consider the possibility of a universal spiritual revelation. The critical Bible student must have an understanding of the sacred writings of other nations and peoples, especially those of the Near East, Babylon, Chaldea, and Persia, and of North Africa, the sacred writings of the Egyptians and the Greco-Egyptian restoration. Thus, by degrees, the study of the Bible broadens the religious perspective, makes it possible to take a more inclusive attitude toward scriptural writing. The advantage of this is immediate, in that it liberates the mind from restrictions and prejudice, thus freeing it for clear and direct thinking about important matters. So this evening we want to approach, as we have approached the other sections of this work, those books of the New Testament, from the Acts of the Apostles to the Revelation of St. John. These group together, and because of the limitation of time, we cannot separate them. We must try to consider their composite message perhaps devoting a little special attention to the Romans and to the book of Revelation. The moment we pass from the evangelists, from the four books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, to the Epistles, the Acts, the minor pastoral books, and the Apostles, we move from the foundation of the words of Jesus to those foundations which belong in the early period of the apostolic era. And from the Acts on, with the exception of Revelation, we are strongly under the